Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Psycho, and I've got another Walking Dead review for you all today. This one is going to be a review of the Season 6 finale of The Walking Dead, titled Last Day on Earth. And there's something I do want to cover. I will note the positives of this episode, but there's something that I have to get off my chest at the very beginning of this review because it has to be covered, and I have to be honest with you all. I know that many other people, including myself, were very disappointed in the way that this episode ended. And although before I saw this episode, I was actually, open to the idea of a cliffhanger, but I don't think they dealt with it in the right way, and I do not like the way they cliffhanged the ending of this. And not only was the cliffhanger bad in my opinion, I also didn't like how they at least did not use one F-word with Negan, and I know a lot of people who don't read comics don't understand what I mean here, but Negan is a person that truly does use foul language, and they could have at least dropped one F-bomb in this, but to me it seemed like they were more afraid of having to pay a small fine of dropping one word, and they avoided it altogether. And I don't feel like that $15,000 or $5,000 fine would matter that much because Breaking Bad dropped the F-bomb, and I feel like the biggest introduction in The Walking Dead deserves at least one F-bomb, especially as I was starting to check the time as he was doing the eeny, meeny, miny, mo thing. I was starting to get worried that they were going to cliffhang it because to give a great death and show a great death scene, it usually takes a little bit of time, and as I saw there were only a few minutes left, I was like, please don't do this. Don't do it to us loyal fans that have waited all season long and you've hopped us up for something like this, and then you're just going to abruptly stop it and make us wait till next season? Now that I have addressed that a little bit, I'm going to address it further on within this review. This might be a two-parter because I am going to talk about a lot of things, considering it was more than the normal episode time amount, so I do want to fully flesh this review out and discuss it with you all. Now, considering those negatives, I'm going to note some of the positive things that I saw in this episode. This episode did have a very interesting start, and we saw the opening of this was actually the preview that we got on AMC's page on YouTube, and it's with the scene with Morgan and the horse, and then we see that one of the saviors is following him, and then we also get that dark scene where the light is shining through the darkness, and I actually thought that would be Daryl waking up, but as we saw, it was the rest of the group trapped in the container in which the saviors finally brought them out of. But anyways, let's move back on to the beginning of this episode. I really like how they showed some of Carl because we really haven't gotten Carl in a long time. I think it was like the last 3 episodes we didn't get any of Carl, and I liked finally getting a little growth with his character once again with Enid, and I really loved their conversation between Carl and Enid, where we could see Carl's explaining his side, and we are on Carl's side, and we know Enid is probably not prepared to face them like Carl is, and then she wonders why is Carl going out there, and then realizes that he wants vengeance on these people for killing Denise. That is disrespecting Carl and his people, and he wants to get revenge on them. I like how to solve that situation, he decides to do what needs to be done and lock her in the closet, and for a minute it did lead us to think that, oh, is he really gonna bring her along on that ride? And I was going to definitely disagree with that decision, so I'm glad that he finally locked her in the closet, and that was his only way of stopping her because we saw that Enid is persistent and she does not like to listen to other people. Carl also sort of threw it back in her face about how she was wrong about how Alexandria can be protected. In addition to that, I think we got the scene with Stephen Oggs. He's the actor who plays the Savior, and if you don't know, the Savior that I'm talking about is the one with the big mustache, the person that it made look like the lead Savior until Negan was introduced, and he was actually Trevor from GTA 5, so I know a lot of people know him from that as well. And I'm just going to call him Trevor or Stephen Oggs because I don't know his name in this episode, so I'm just going to refer to him as that. One thing that I do want to really give them props on is that this intro was very, very fantastic, especially with the scene with the Saviors where they're chasing the guy in the woods, and it did feel like a classic horror movie where we're seeing someone run in the woods and we hear the sound effects such as like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you've got the chainsaw in the background, or like in another movie you've got the Halloween music playing, but with this we got the whistling, and that is actually something I did in another video where I talked about how I absolutely love the whistling that went on. Because by doing this, like I mentioned in the other video, they're going to create that whistling as like a trademark thing with these saviors, and whenever you hear it, just as Rick and the gang got the spotlight shined on them, whenever you hear that, you know that it's the saviors, and you know that it's something bad. So with that whistling sound effect, The Walking Dead stacks itself up on that shelf with the Predator movies, the Halloween movies, the Jaws movies because of their great soundtracks and sound effects that are used, in which you can just hear that one sound effect and know where it's from, and I thought that was very awesome. Just seeing that person being chased run through the woods was definitely intense and intimidating when you hear all of those whistles. The guy knows they're behind him, he doesn't know how close they are, but it's very intimidating, and I thought it was a great way to introduce some of those saviors. I also really loved it when they finally caught up to him, and he's like, "We strung one of your people up to teach you a lesson, yet you still try to run and attack us." And he's like, "Now we're going to teach you a lesson." And that definitely points to the idea, in our minds we see that they have raided another community and they have wreaked their havoc on other people just like we know them to do, and it is definitely just something that's very intimidating to think about. We know this group is a bunch of big bullies and they show no mercy. They are ruthless with other groups, and their intimidation factor is off the charts, especially with everything they've got going on. Even their numbers are absolutely huge. It then kicks it back to the scene with Rick and Father Gabriel and Spencer Monroe, and I really love that scene. Like I mentioned in one of my other videos I did, that was a preview on Talking Dead, and I just really liked seeing this relationship grow with Father Gabriel and Rick finally learning that he can trust Father Gabriel, because throughout time and time again, lately we have seen that Father Gabriel can definitely back his words up, especially when he says, "You can trust me, Rick. Do you trust me?" And then Rick is like, "Yes, I do." And that was just an awesome thing to see. We see that relationship bond forming and growing stronger, and that was just very cool to see Rick finally trusting Father Gabriel. Especially since we saw back in Season 6, Episode 1, the premiere, where he shot down Father Gabriel when he requested to help out in taking all of the walkers out of the quarry and leading them somewhere else, so it's very awesome to see that growth happen. We also see the moments where Aaron and Eugene are talking with Rick. Eugene is like, "I'm doing this no matter what you say," and Aaron pretty much has the same feelings as well, and I love the moment where Aaron tells Rick, "You're gonna have to punch me in the face and tie me up to keep me off this RV," and it did present a really cool callback in a comedic way, and Rick's like, okay, I respect that, and then he lets him on the RV, so that was definitely cool as well. We also see the Saviors setting up their blockade on the road, and we know that they're waiting on them, and they already have their plans set in motion, and then ahead of that, it's just tension only throughout the whole episode. We see Rick and the group finally meet up with them in the RV, and all of them walk out, and Rick tries to come across with a peaceful solution, and I think to look back now, Rick and them would have wished that they would have just tried and made their last stand right there, instead of meeting up with Negan. But it was definitely interesting to see this interaction, and one thing that I do want to note that I loved from the dialogue was where Rick said something along the lines of, "Do you really want this to be someone's last day on Earth?" And this is where we get the episode name, and at first I was really kind of aggravated that they didn't have something to fear in this title, but now after hearing this dialogue and hearing the guy speak back to Rick, Stephen Oggs, he says, "Do you want it to be one of your people's last day on Earth?" And he sort of turns it back on Rick, and Rick is still confident at this moment that he can get through this situation, and it was probably something that reverberated in Rick's mind throughout the whole episode, especially as he got farther and farther, deeper and deeper into this giant hole of a situation. So now after hearing that dialogue, I am satisfied with this title of the episode, because this dialogue was very important, and I felt like it was delivered in a very tension-filled way. We then see Rick retreat and pull the smart move of what we actually thought would be smart in the moment, and I was actually on his side at the moment and thought, well, this is probably the best thing to do for now. And then we see that Eugene puts his talents to use, and he was actually useful, very useful, throughout this whole episode when it came with ideas and mapping and all of that. He actually became a very useful character. Moving back on over to Morgan and Carol's situation, Morgan finally meets up with Carol and finds out that she was shot. I think she was shot, and then she gives the look like, "Oh no, are you still following me?" and talks about why she left. And it was something that confirmed my ideas and beliefs in my other videos that I had put out, where she basically says, "I don't like killing, but when I'm around people I love, I have to kill, and it's something that I cannot do, so that is why I leave the people I love." And it really is a complex idea and sort of like a paradox, because even when she does leave the people she loves, she still ends up having to kill people, as we saw with the Saviors in episode 15. We get more development with Morgan as he tries to persuade her to come back, and Carol just says that she's done, she can't do it anymore. And then we finally see Morgan go outside to clear out the walker that is making all of the noise, and we see a person strung up in a tower-like structure, and this is exactly what the Savior known as Stephen Oggs was talking about when he says, we strung up one of your people, and we tried to teach you all a lesson. So this is actually a reference to the person that Morgan has come across, and slowly we see this foreshadowing of what the Saviors do to these people to intimidate and show that you are now our property and you are going to work for us. So it was really cool to see what the Savior was actually talking about, in which Morgan came across it to see it ourselves. I also thought this was a pretty awesome situation because the reason Morgan had to kill this walker was because it was dangling and swaying and moving its arms and hitting the sides of the structure, which would then make noise and attract other walkers that were at the fence, and them hitting on the fence would make more noise, which would attract even more walkers, so he had to kill this walker, and I thought it was definitely an interesting situation. And even after the fact that he killed the walker, I was actually thinking in my mind that Morgan would cut this walker down as a sign of respect for this person that was brutally murdered, and I thought that was a really cool notion, and it was a notion that definitely seemed like Morgan. In addition to that, we head back with Rick's group in the RV. They get remapped, they're going down their new path, and then once again they meet some more Saviors, and it's like, oh no, not this all over again. And this time it seemed like there were more people, and Carl tells Rick, he says, let's go for it, and we see that vengeance in Carl's eyes. We know that Carl wants revenge. As he admitted later on in the episode, he wants to get revenge for Denise. But Rick tells him no. He's like, there's 16 of them. He counted it really fast, and he's like, there's 16 of these people. Let's just head back. So they reroute once again, but one thing that I found really cool was his interaction with Maggie and him giving this hope speech. And in the background, we saw Carl looking from over his shoulder, and it was very interesting because Carl was once in this position just a few months ago, and Carl is actually seeing from a different perspective, as if he is looking at himself of what position he was in a while back. And now he is hearing this hope speech that Rick is talking about once again. And I think this speech did make Carl feel a lot better because he knows that Rick was right. They corrected a lot of things, they rebuilt their community, and they did a lot of things since the events that happened with him and the Alexandrians. So I feel like there was some doubt within the RV group, but there was also a lot of faith in Rick, just like Maggie said she had faith in Rick. And throughout the episode, we see a huge degradation of Rick's hope. Slowly, we start to see Rick's hope at a very, very high level, like at a 10, and then it starts decreasing slowly by like 1s, and then until we finally meet up with Negan, the hope level is at 0. Rick and the gang take an alternate third path this time, and the Saviors really did mix it up on them with this one. As Eugene would call it, it was the Red Rover of walkers. Now, I really love this scene, honestly, and I want to explain why. For one thing, it was a very creative use on the Savior's part of using walkers to their advantage. Rick was once again still smart about this and talking about how they really have to have numbers to do this. It takes a lot of people to get all of those walkers chained up and keep control of them. The next thing that I really loved about this was the fact that the Saviors used another partial intimidation tactic in which they put Michonne's braid on one of the walkers, they had Daryl's vest on another walker, and I thought this was an absolutely awesome intimidation tactic. And what this actually reminds me of was back at Terminus, where Rick notices some of the attire that their group wears on some of the termites, like the pocket watch that Herschel gave to Glenn in the guy's pocket, and then another one is wearing Daryl's poncho. So that's kind of what came to my head when I saw this, and I really did like this use of intimidation. It was also really awesome to see that not only did they have it set up with walkers, but they also had people set up there as well, and they once again used another tactic of the termites, was shooting at their feet, and this time Rick and them understood exactly what they were doing because they had experienced what happened with the termites. I noticed that they shot Rick's hatchet out of his hand, I think, and he picks it up, and then he thinks about hitting the chain the first time, and then we see he cuts the walker's arms off. And in my head, what this also reminded me of was when Rick had to cut off Jesse's arm, and I do think that that reminded him of that as well. It was definitely something awesome to see, and then as they finally get the RV through, Rick and the group realizes that the Saviors want them to go this way. They are wanting this to happen, and they want them to waste their gas on going different routes, but in the end they want this to happen, and everything is playing into their hands, and they realize that they have to do something about it. Now transitioning back on over to Morgan and Carol. Morgan sees that Carol has actually left as he went outside to deal with the walkers. He gets on his horse, and one of the reasons that I think Morgan turns right instead of left is that we see the walkers are already following the direction to the right as if they're following something, as if they heard a noise, and that is definitely something that I really enjoy. It's something that's small, but it's very intelligent, and I really love analyzing things like that because I think Morgan picked up on that as well, and he realizes the walkers are attracted to that direction because they possibly heard Carol going through that direction, and that's why Morgan goes right. So I thought that was pretty awesome.